Alright, let's customize a jacket and talk about some queer Muppets, shall we? Now, some of you may be wondering, why Muppets? Well, that's easy to answer, because I like them. I have had a puppetry special interest since I was a child, and I adore the Muppets. And although this might surprise some of you, there is a lot of queer subtext and even actually queer Muppet characters to talk about here. A few things first. Muppet means any Henson character from the pre-Sam and Friends days, Sam and Friends, Sesame Street, The Muppet Show and Muppet Movies, of course, Fraggle Rock, Emmett Otter, and Bear in the Big Blue House. So no Dark Crystal, Labyrinth, or other Henson media, even though especially Dark Crystal has some excellent queer characters as well. Also, no. Talking about queer tones in Muppet media is not disrespectful of Jim Henson, nor would he be turning around in his grave if he knew about some of the modern openly queer additions to Muppet canon. For one, he was cremated and has no grave to turn around in, and two, he was not at all opposed to queer people or queer themes. With that out of the way, and since I am making an Electric Mayhem jacket, let's start with them, shall we? Now, the Mayhem, aka the Muppet Band, first appeared in the Muppet Show pilot Sex and Violence and have been a staple part of Muppet Show media ever since. But are they queer? Not explicitly so, but they do embody the idea of found family, which resonates with a lot of queer people, especially those who haven't experienced a lot of support within their birth family. Queer people often find comfort, love, support, family within queer spaces. So whilst found family isn't inherently queer, it is a theme a lot of queer folks can relate to especially. And there's another factor why I wanted to talk about the Mayhem in the context of queer Muppets. Richard Hunt. Richard was one of Janice's many performers, but arguably the one most people connect with Janice and that other performers aim to emulate when performing her. Richard Hunt was a gay Muppet performer who influenced the entire Muppet media landscape immensely, performing many well-beloved characters from an incredibly young age compared to other performers. And whilst he didn't play Janice as explicitly queer, he was still a queer man on the Muppet cast. We also have him to thank for an incredibly heart-wrenching episode of Fraggle Rock, Gone But Not Forgotten. The episode centers around Wembley and a character called Mudwell the Mud Bunny. The two of them hit it off right away, sharing similar interests, and suddenly, out of the blue, Mudwell starts pushing Wembley away. When Wembley still comes back to see Mudwell, he finds out his new friend behaved this way because he was dying. Mudwell is dying and didn't want his new friend to have to deal with the pain of losing a friend. This episode came out at a time when HIV was rampant, especially in queer circles, and at a time when queer people were being ostracized extremely. HIV was labeled the gay disease. Queer people contracting it were often treated horribly in hospitals. Governments were doing little to help the many communities affected by HIV. And worst of all, there weren't the medical advancements yet that we have today. Many queer people passed due to HIV or related complications, leaving behind family and friends. It wasn't uncommon for people contracting HIV to try and isolate themselves to protect their friends from the pain of loss, just as Mudwell does in this episode. This parallel is by no means accidental. Richard Hunt at the time of filming was going through the pain of losing his partner due to HIV. He later talked about how personal this episode was to him. Richard Hunt himself would later pass away due to HIV-related complications, only aged 40. But even though he passed so young, he left the Muppets forever changed, forever influenced. The Muppets would not be what they are if not for Richard Hunt. Staying on the topic of Fraggle Rock, the reboot of the series, Back to the Rock, added some more explicitly queer themes in both seasons 1 and 2. Season 2 specifically explores gender, introducing us to a fabulous character called the Great Glitterini, voiced by queer musician Adam Lambert, who is clearly intended to be a queer elder. The Great Glitterini gives both Wembley and a Back to the Rock original character named Pogey a safe space to experiment with gender presentation. Wembley has a character-typical anxiety attack over wanting to express himself in a certain way, but being worried about what his friends might think. Everyone sees me in one way, but sometimes I feel different. Choosing one way, it feels so permanent. Of course, by the end of the episode, Wembley gets accepted by his friends, and for the rest of the series, he is accepted no matter how he chooses to present, whether or not he wears feminine or masculine style clothing. Also, Pogey uses they/them pronouns and is likewise accepted for their identity, and it is revealed that they picked their own name. On Trans Day of Visibility 2024, the Jim Henson Company shared a post of Glitterini as well, who, like I said, is written as a queer elder who doesn't adhere to gender roles and conformity of our human society. It was kind of groundbreaking to see this episode, to have these characters, Pogey, Glitterini, Wembley. They are explicitly, undeniably written as queer, and it is beautiful. Speaking of trans Muppets, let's talk about Gonzo. Do any of you remember when the Disney Muppet Babies series did the Gonzorella episode that had Gonzo as non-binary coded and a bunch of conservative homophobes got butthurt about it? Well, fun fact, there was a Cinderella retelling with Gonzo in a traditionally feminine role way before that. Gonzo as the fairy god thing in the Disneyland 35th anniversary celebration. And of course, there is the 1984 comic strip of Gonzo passing by the toilets labeled man and woman and going into the one labeled whatever. Canonically, both Gonzo's gender and species are whatever, and if that's not some non-binary shit, then I don't know what is. There are a bunch of other queer and trans-coded Muppets to talk about, Miss Piggy being one, Fienchen from German Sesame Street being another, or Pepe the King Prawn, who has canonically stated his attraction to a man, as well as the very simple statement of gender is fluid. But the last ones I want to talk about are Ernie and Bert of Sesame Street. Now there is controversy around those two, I know, but bear with me. I started watching Sesame Street at age 2, and to me it was always kind of clear that Ernie and Bert were married. Not because of anything specifically stated, just based on how they interacted, and because they lived together, and to my child mind, two adults living together meant that they had to be married. So when ages and ages later, news came out that a Sesame Street writer was basing how he was writing Ernie and Bert on his own relationship with his husband, I personally didn't think much of it. But many people were appalled. They even messaged Frank Oz, who of course was one of Jim Henson's best friends and who originated many characters including Bert. Mind you, all of this chaos and anger was over a writer saying, "Ernie and Bert remind me of me and my husband, so I don't know any other way than to write them as a loving couple." So it's by no means a dirty or over-sexualized take on these characters, as many an enraged Twitter user at the time was making it out to be. Anyways, people were tweeting at Frank Oz, and originally he was very strongly against the interpretation of said Sesame writer. However, and this is the important bit, the growth bit, after many people explained to him why they, as queer people, related to Ernie and Bert, he said this: "If Jim and I had created B and E as gay characters, they would be inauthentic coming from two straight men. However, I have now learned that many view them as representative of a loving gay relationship. And that is pretty wonderful. Thanks for helping me understand." Admittedly, the Sesame Workshop did put out an official message that in Sesame Street canon, Ernie and Bert are just best friends, but I feel like what Frank said on the matter is more important. He is the person that created Bert after all, and for him to say that he thinks people viewing Ernie and Bert as a loving queer couple as beautiful is incredibly important, and it holds so much weight. It is him endorsing the headcanon, endorsing the choices of writer Mark Saltzman. I do think that in terms of queer representation, the Muppets still have a long way to go, as all of media still has a long way to go, but it is getting better. We are getting more and more every year, and that is incredibly important. This is not just me as a queer person saying this. This is me as an anthropologist researching media and representation saying this. And performers like Richard Hunt, writers like Mark Saltzman, and characters like Pogey and Gonzo paved the way. And in the time it took me to tell you all of this, I have finished my jacket customization, so let's go ahead with the reveal.